Hello and welcome to the show. So I'm really enjoying these Thursday nights to get to have a good opportunity to chat to people behind the scenes, from label owners to record shops to producers to DJs, and it's a great opportunity to kind of dig a little bit deep. As you guys know, the reason why I do this is back then, there wasn't really any coverage in the magazines, there wasn't certainly any socials or anything. So unless you kind of knew someone in that circle, you didn't really know what was going on behind the scenes. And this is an opportunity to speak to those people that were there, that forged part of it, were there in the very beginning, that were influential, and have them tell their story. And this week's guest definitely was there from the very, very beginning, was definitely very, very influential, and had quite possibly one of the most influential labels that kickstarted this whole scene. So it was with great pleasure that I am going to introduce the head honcho for Suburban Base Records, just some of the collection up there in the back, Danny Donnelly. Danny, how you doing, mate? You all right?
Hello, Jay. How you doing, mate?
I'm doing very well, sir.
Just before we come on air, I said your room looks like my room. We got all the sub bass up there.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? We had it like this shot, and it looked quite similar. And then when we did this, I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely missing quite a few of those gold discs in my room.
Yeah, I collected a few of them over the years. That's been nice. I mean, that's been not an accolade along the way is lovely, but it's more about how people love and enjoy and respond to what we've done over the years. Really, that's the real reward,
Well, you know what? But I will start from the little bit beginning, but I do want to ask you. It's 30 years of Suburban Base next year.
Yeah.
Would you have ever thought that at this stage that Suburban Base is still such an influence and such an important part of music for what it's done back then and what it does?
I mean, it just is very strange even to hear you say that, and for me to sort of like take pause to kind of really recognize what the label has meant and what we did back then and how important it was to so many people. I mean, we were just friends hanging out, making music together, enjoying ourselves. We'd go to a rave on the weekend. We'd go straight into the studio, which was just a little ramshackle studio in my mum and dad's garage, and we'd be inspired by what we just heard. We were out raving, we were part of the scene and doing it because we loved it, and I don't think there was any grand master plan. It was I've always had a very instinctive kind of business acumen, and I think anyone in the scene that knows me or has worked with me will tell you that. Very instinctively, I kind of knew what to do to bring things to market and do it properly. And but the idea would still be talking about it in 30 years time. I mean, and at that age as well, I started my record shop when I was 17 years old. So at that age, you just you don't really plan or think that far ahead,
Yeah.
So no, it's amazing. It's just very flattering that people still engage with what we did all that time ago,
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, let's rewind a little bit before that time. I'm always interested to know with the guests, what was that kind of first musical spark, that musical inspiration where you kind of went, hold on a minute, I can relate to that.
Oh, I mean, I tell you what, there was always music in the house, and that my dad was a big music fan. He was into like Motown and Philly and all the kind of I guess he was like something of a mod back in his day, and so he was into all these sort of northern soul tunes and Motown stuff and stuff like that. So I grew up listening to a lot of American black soul artists and funk and stuff like that, around the house. And from a very young age I became almost obsessive in like collecting records. Most of these behind me here, I mean, I've got a record room at my house that, the entire room is wall to wall, records, and most of it you'll find is jazz, funk, soul, a lot of hip hop. When I became a teen, I was into like, the early sort of like 80s hip hop scene and stuff like that. And that was it for me. It was always music. I was listening to. I mean, I got an elder sister by 2 years, and she was listening to pirate radio. And back then it would have been like LWR and Solar and Kiss before it was a legal station. All the early sort of soul pirate radio stations. So there was always music around the house. And at like 13 years old, 14 years old, I was like sneaking out to go to, you know, soul concerts. I'm going to see like Maze and Frankie Beverly and, you know, Luther Vandross or someone, you know. At 13, I'm like sneaking out to go to these. This was like, you know, pre-raving. The rave thing came about, you know, organically as being part of it. Because before there was rave, it was there were warehouse parties, but it was like that kind of rare groove scene. So
yeah,
if you're in you know, that sort of age group and you're going out and there was like these underground warehouse parties, but it was like that rare groove sort of soul to soul kind of era. And it all, you know, that whole movement just kind of like, for me, kind of blended into one, you know, and I wasn't so into like the initial wave of like acid house, should we say, you know, like the first sort of, you know, the Detroit techno, you know, I was into a few bits of it, you know, the Chicago house, stuff like that. But I'm like, no, I'm a hip hop head, you know, I'm into my beats and my breaks and stuff like that. Which I guess is where, you know, the sound that we end up developing kind of comes from, you know. It's like we were into that style wise, you know, you can see that hip hop influence. And then musically, I was into the breaks and the beats. From this is the thing, Jay, from collecting these old funk records that have got the original break beats, I'm into hip hop, and I could tell you where these breaks come from, where the breakdown comes from. So I was always into breaks before drum and bass, breakbeat hardcore, whatever you need to call it, pre-drum and bass, right? I knew the breaks because I was like that train spotter kid into it. Oh, it's always been about it, mate. It's just been, I've been obsessive, you know, really.
So there was definitely, even back then, even before, I guess, like the idea of kind of producing your own tracks, you were already a keen spotter of, you know, sounds and samples and getting into the music on a kind of layer beneath, kind of just appreciating the music. Would you say that?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. You know, I was into those sounds. I knew I wanted to do something in music. I didn't know what it was. I sort of grew up in and around Stratford. I was born in Stratford, and then parents moved out to Romford, but still had a business in Stratford. My first and only job, I had like a part-time job with Sounds Like Records in Stratford, and that's where I kind of learnt my trade and decided I wanted to open a record shop. But that was just to be around music, and this was really pre the rave scene, you know. And it was, I guess I'm 16. I just left school and I'm working at this job part time.
What year would it have been? Do you remember what year that was?
Like 87, 88. I'd finished school, and then, but rewind before that, I played blues parties around East London at 14 years old. You know, like reggae, lovers rock, kind of blues parties. I'm like this, you know, little white kid in the corner playing at like this ragga kind of blues party in Stratford somewhere, you know, somewhere around E15 area, and completely like unintimidated because like I knew I was there for the music, and people knew I was there for the music. Do you know what I mean? And it was, I don't, you know, an age thing didn't hold me back. It was just like, I'm doing this. I'm obsessed with this. There's nothing else I'm going to do, you know? And once I was in it, when I started working in a record shop, it's like, okay, this I can do. I want to have my own shop, you know? I don't want to work in a shop like this that's selling like the top 40. I want to do something that I love, you know? And just went for it.
Just going back to that DJing thing, I suppose one of the other things to factor in there, which really kind of backs up, you know, being all about the music. being a DJ then wasn't cool. You know, it's not, you know, being a DJ has evolved so much over the last kind of 30 years. But, you know, back then it was just like, you know, some nerdy guy that was in the corner with a box of 7-inch records and, you know, no one paid any attention to him. You know, that was it. And to do those things, you know, it was about the passion for the music and sharing that music with other people.
Yeah. I mean, it had to be about the passion. I mean, to me, it was cool. I didn't want to do what everyone else was doing. So you know, all the kids at school were listening to, you know, whatever top 40 records and didn't really get what I was doing. You know, at 14, I snuck out and got the tube up to the West End to go and see. I went to see Curtis Mayfield in concert, to perform a jazz concert. No one at my school knew who that was, you know, and I'm like 14 years old, getting into these venues because like they were already heroes of mine, you know.
Yeah.
And the idea of it being a passion, I mean, you pirate radio and that breaking into, you know, warehouses to put on a party, you don't do that for money and fame. You do that because you love it. You do that, you take those kind of risks. I mean, we were taking risks, doing things illegally, you know, running the risk of being arrested and charged, you know. People were putting on parties. People were you know, climbing up on top of tower. I don't know if you ever had to go through that, but it ain't fun being on, you know, 20 stories up on a tower block. I can tell you that. Not something I did regularly, but I've done it. And friends of mine that ran stations, you know, God bless them, because we needed to get the music out there. It weren't all internet radio and Twitch back then. You know, it's like the message had to get out there, and you had to do it for the love of it, mate. I mean, that's you get a little bit of notoriety, maybe, you know, you get to shout out your friends, but you're not doing it for money and fame at that stage. You're doing it because it's an absolute passion, you know.
Yeah. So you work at this record shop in Stratford. So then what are the steps you're thinking? So obviously, you know, you've always said that you wanted to be selling the music that you were passionate about. How did you make that a reality?
Hello, mate. So Jay, I'm just doing an interview. All right, then, babe. My son's just arrived home and didn't know I was doing this.
That's
so.
all right, no worries. we had fantasy. It's all good, mate. We had to take a call from his wife, and he was like chatting away and saying, "Yeah." So it's all good, mate.
He just pulled up. Didn't know he was coming round. Sorry, mate. What were you saying? We were talking about.
So we're saying you're working at the record shop and you're thinking, right, you know, I want to sell this. I want to sell the music that I do. So how do you take? What are the next steps that you're taking to make that a reality?
Well, it was a case of like working in this record shop. I mean, it's only a part-time job. I've never had a real job. I always say I've only ever worked for myself, and you know, I make a joke about, you know, who would employ me. Do you know what I mean? I've only ever worked for myself, but the truth of it was, I got this little job at this mainstream record store in Stratford that sold, you know, the top 40 hits and that kind of thing. And I wanted a job in one of the specialist stores. I wanted to just be around it, you know. And so I applied to, what was it, City Sounds and Bluebird, and those were the shops at the time. This was before Black Market and all those kind of shops. And I couldn't get a job. It was a lot of like who you knew, and you couldn't just sort of send your CV and say, "Oh, I'm this 16-year-old kid that loves music, wants to be around it. Can I come and work there, please?" That didn't really work. And I thought, well, you know, and this is something I've carried with me ever since. I just went, well, you know what? I'm just going to do it myself. It was like, screw it, I'll just do it, you know? And at that time, I'd already been buying and selling records, you know, out of my record bag. I would be that kid that would go and get, you know, a rare breakbeat on a track from a charity shop, you know, pay 50p for it, and then have it in my record bag and sell it on to someone for whatever. You know, I'd go and find those rarities and go digging in the crates and find bits and pieces. So I was already buying and selling records.
Yeah.
And I built up quite an extensive collection. And to me, the next logical step, I couldn't get the job I wanted in a record shop. I'll open my own. And back then, I guess you could borrow money, because I actually got a bank loan to pay down like a deposit on a lease on a shop in Romford, and that was Boogie Times. And I was 17 years old when I went to see the bank manager, and he approved the loan after my 18th birthday. He said, when you turn 18, I'd already gone in and had a meeting with the bank manager at 17 years old. I said, this is what I found the shop, and I opened up. I got the keys to that shop, went in there with a couple of my mates that I grew up with, and we painted. We had like a painting party, I guess you would have called it. We didn't call it that back then, but bought a couple of pizzas and painted the whole shop out. It was it used to be a flower shop. It was Molly's Florist on Victoria Road, Romford, and they had this big counter. A lot of people don't even know this. The big counter, quite deep, was for making flowers up on. They'd make bouquets of flowers on it, and I thought, that's right, we're keeping that, and that's where the 1210s went, and that's why the counter was so deep. But it was great because you'd have the 1210s there, and you had all this room to have all your records were all there, and we were sorting them all out, and so they were prepping flowers there and making bouquets on it. Exactly the same counter. We got some plastic sheets and stuff to recover it, so it looked like brand new. But everything was like, I got some record racks out of the Exchange of Mart. This was before eBay and all that sort of stuff. So the Exchange of Mart, I
was going even probably before Loot magazine as well.
Yeah, it was that was how you found it. If you want like a second-hand thing, so we had all these second-hand record racks, shop closing down, and went and picked them up. And the cheapest roller carpet, someone off the back of a van come knocking on the door, saw us moving in. Oh, I'm selling rolls of carpet, and we put that down ourselves, and that was it. We opened up the stores. The speakers, the legendary speakers, those great big grey stacks, I already had them because I purchased them back when I was doing. I fancied I was going to start a sound system around East London. We did a couple of parties, and me and a couple of pals from sort of around Stratford way, we put on a couple of parties in the function room of the local pub down Forest Gate, or whatever it was, right? And so those big speakers were meant to be a sound system that was going to come together, and they ended up going into the shop, and they became legendary. And in fact, Uncle Doug's has got them. I don't know he came by them, but he's kept them and preserved them, and they're sitting in his basement somewhere. And I'm a little bit jealous he's still got them, but what a lovely thing, all of them, because so many people got so many good memories of us shaking the bus stop out the front, and it being like a rave there on a Saturday morning. It's like good times.
Well, it's funny. I was talking to Neil Trix last week, and he was saying about banging tunes. He said what you used to get was people would roll through from the night before, and you'd turn up at the shop in the morning. There's a queue of like 40 ravers out there just waiting to hear some tunes and keep the party going. Do you have a similar kind of vibe going on at Boogie Time Zen as well?
Anyone that was a Boogie Times customer, and hopefully that's who's going to be tuning in and checking this out, they'll all agree that it was like Saturday afternoon. There was like a rave. People would come in, not even buy records. They would just sit on that little shelf at the front, and again, that little shelf at the front, in front of the window, was where they used to put all the flower displays. That's why the shop was laid out like that. But it ended up working perfectly for us. It was like a little bench, and we'd put all the flyers on there, and people would just hang out all day, just come in there. There was a cafe next door, so people would get their lunch, stay, and it was such a nice vibe. It sounded so good. Winston and Danny would like play the tunes at such a volume, and scratch them up and mix them in and make them sound so good. People would get home with like tracks they would never have bought. Years later, people were telling me, I bought so many shit tunes because they sounded great on your sound system. They sounded great when Danny Breaks was cutting it in, and you know, a bunch of people have you know, got stuff in their collection. They're like, what the I buy that for? Do you know what I mean? But yeah, we just kept the vibe going. You know, the vibe was just lovely in there, and there'd always be like guests coming in, and you know, Andy C used to come in, you know, in his school uniform. That's how long I've known Andy. He used to come in as a kid, and you know, he'd get behind the decks, and then another time, you know, Zinc would be behind the decks. Hype would just spend half a Saturday afternoon in there, and there was always like a few faces about, and it was just, it was almost like an after party, a pre-party, you know, whatever you want to call it, you know.
Yeah.
Good.
What was the? Do you remember the first day that you opened up? Do you remember what day that was?
I really don't. I don't. I remember vaguely the first week. I remember the first week, a couple of fellas came in a suit. You know, they must have been, you know, working in a bank down the road or estate agents or something, and made a bunch of snide comments like, we're both wearing suits, around, oh, this won't be here long, oh, this ain't gonna last, yeah, good luck with that, mate. Like, literally taking the mick out of us. And I was like, what you didn't come in for? Get out. Do you know what I mean? And then, you know, 30 years later, there's, you know, people are still talking about that place, the label, and the career that I've enjoyed. You know what I mean? It's like stuff like that kind of spurs you on, you know.
Yeah.
But on the whole, a very nice reception.
Yeah.
That bank loan that I mentioned to you before, Jay, I managed to just repay that fully within a year of, you know, so business was good. I had a natural aptitude for business, and it was something that, you know, it didn't ever feel like a job, you know. We were just like working night and day, going out at night, coming back in, making sure that the doors opened, you know, first thing in the morning. It never felt like a job. It felt like an absolute pleasure to be around, you know, the music like that all the time, you know.
Talk to me a little bit more about the people in the shop, because obviously you mentioned like Danny and Winston. Like, how did you meet these guys, and how did they come to get involved with the shop?
Well, Winston, DJ Runtings on the label. Me and Win were actually friends before Boogie Times. So he was one of my customers in Sounds Right Records in Stratford. He was a local boy, Forest Gate boy. And
right.
So we were making before then, and we would, you know, went out, you know, to a couple of parties and bits and pieces together. Not even during this was like, again, before either of us were really raving, you know. Me and Win went out. So when I sort of said, oh, I'm going to be leaving here, I'm not going to be working here anymore, I'd already made up some business cards. And I thought I'd nick a few customers, you know. I'd sort of like, you know, put the word out. And I had a few business cards. I had this huge mobile phone, this brick of a mobile phone, and that number was on there because, you know, we hadn't moved in yet. So and Win kept in touch, and then when I opened the doors there, he just sort of like came down and started helping out. And him helping out and hanging around the shop turned into, well, you're behind the counter, you know, this might as well be a job, you know. I need a hand. I can't. For the first little while, I was behind the counter on my own, you know, trying to do everything. As things started snowballing, and you're like, you know, this is getting bigger. And then Danny was one of our first customers. Again, he's essentially a hip hop kid, and he was a scratch DJ, and he was going in like the DMC scratch competition, stuff like that. And he was coming into the shop and started coming in quite regularly because I had all that soul, funk, and jazz albums in the shop. It was never really intended to be a rave shop from day one, because it was right at the start, before that was even like the phenomenon that, you know, we know it became. So Danny used to come in and he'd be like, I want breaks, because he was a scratch DJ. So you would want the break beats. So he went in my address book as Danny Breaks. And I basically gave him that name. Everyone knows him as Danny Breaks. It was because he kept calling us up. Have you got break beats? Have you got, and he wanted this break beat from whichever funk track, and and he wanted all the original breaks. So he went in my address book as Danny Breaks, and Danny Breaks he was forever. That was it. His artist name was born from that, just from me sort of like taking the mick a little bit, really. Oh, Danny Breaks, hey, it's Danny Breaks, and that's who he became.
That's amazing.
Yeah, again, I don't think people know that story either, and that's where that comes from. So he was a customer, and then ended up get in there, get behind the decks, help us out. Help us out on a Saturday. That became a full time, every day of the week, and it was great. Little crew was forming,
That's nice. I actually met Danny a few times because myself, Danny, Neil Mitchell, and I guess we used to be the residents at Andy's Ram Night down at the end. So me, Danny, and Neil used to do it, but Danny was always playing first. So it was only if he stuck around a bit that I'd see him, because I was always on at 3, and Danny was always on a bit earlier because it was kind of built up for the night. But he seemed like an absolutely lovely guy, and obviously did some amazing things in the scene as well.
Very talented, very, very talented. And I love all his early work, and then in the scene, and then he went on to do a lot of sort of breakbeat, new school break. I don't know what where he went to is a scene I've not been so in touch with, but to sort of transcend scenes like that and earn respect across both, and I think Mark and Digo from Full Hero Reinforced similarly, sort of transcended the scene and was able to do things beyond that as well. Just so much talent come out of those days, and respect to all of those guys.
Nice. Well, it sounds like you definitely had a very sort of family ethos going on with the shop, and I'm assuming that. Well, what was the kind of next steps from the shop is kind of up and running? What are the next steps for you? Are you starting to get into production? Is Suburban Base starting to become a thing?
I mean, again, there was no great plan. Things just kind of happened, and we allowed things just to happen, naturally take their course. My intention was just to run my little record shop and make it the best record shop I could make it, and then one of the ways of doing that was to have exclusive product that only we had. There was quite a hype around DJs, and even wannabe DJs, bedroom DJs, wanting the white labels. White label was the buzzword, and there'd be tracks that were pressed up, and there'd maybe only ever be like 500, 1,000 records pressed up of a certain thing, self-distributed around all the shops, and we weren't getting them. And I'd have to phone up and try and chase down some of these records, because we're this little shop just on the kind of on the edge of town, rather than being right in the center of London. And I'm trying to get all these things, and there's things that we could sometimes get and couldn't always get, but we'd hustle hard to make sure that if people coming in asking for stuff they heard on Pirates, that we'd have it there, and to try and kind of beat them at their own game. That's where the decision was made. But we need exclusive stuff, and it first started with people bringing in some tracks for us to listen to. What do you think of this? And I was like, well, we'll press it up for you. We started doing some white labels ourselves. We'll press that up for you. We'll do 500. We'll keep it exclusive to the shop, and we'll sell it out of here for the first sort of couple of hundred, and then we'll put it into some of the other shops, get rid of the rest, and it would give us a little edge as a shop. So the whole focus was a marketing thing to get the shop busy, and it worked. And people were coming to the shop from miles around, from all over the country even. Because we had these songs that I would press up for ourselves, and then I'd give them to our friends on pirate radio station, and they'd be battering them and supporting them as a favor. They'd be playing them, and then saying the only place you can get this is Boogie Time Records in Romford. Get yourself down. That's where they got copies of this, and it caught a little buzz, and then it was much later that we'd done this a few times, that some of these are really popping off. This could go somewhere. We need to organize a little bit more, give this an imprint, a name, sort out some better distribution than out the boot of my motor.
Yeah.
And it kind of evolved from that. It was like, well, we'll give it an identity. We've got a brand. The style and the look of it all kind of evolved and came about as well as we progressed. And the first I mentioned my mum and dad had a business in Stratford. They owned a grocery store down the bottom of Bow Flyover, and in that store they would do like takeaway food, like sandwiches and cups of tea and stuff like that. Just so happened to be next door to the old block that I used to live in, actually, that I started life in. Fantasy FM was in there, and Fantasy FM, any of your sort of old school heads that were there back in the day, that would have been DJ Hype, DJ Rap, DJ Chrome, all those guys. They were going into my mum and dad's shop to get a cheese sandwich before or after their show and a cup of tea, and they knew my mum and dad before they knew me. And that's how I got to know that little crew. And so Terry Chrome still says your mum makes the best cheese sandwich. You know what I mean? It's like, he still jokes me about it today. So I got to know those guys, and that became the first proper release, Chromosome, which was essentially Chrome and Time under an artist name. That became the first proper release on Suburban Base. Once we decided it's going to have a proper brand and name and identity, but we'd already been doing some white labels for the shop before that, and it just became apparent we should do this properly, So, and I think Hype introduced me to Terry. They already knew mum and dad. I'd met Hype again via mum and dad. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yes.
How integral they were to the race scene. But yeah.
Well, there's no irony lost that basically while I was going out raving in 91, 92, I was working at a fruit and veg shop as well on Preston Road, and we used to go into a cafe, and it was all the same thing. You kind of meet some strange and weird and wonderful people in there. So didn't meet Hype or LSD or any of those guys, but yes, strange world, right?
Yeah, it is a small world. And then I actually spent the day with Remark today, just because I'm back in the UK. I mentioned I've been living in LA for the last 6 years, but I'm back at my UK house, and so I try to catch up with a couple of people. It's been hard because of COVID restrictions stuff, but I spent the day with Remark, and he asked, how's your mum? Everyone asks after mum and dad, whenever I catch up with them, which is lovely, and so, like you say, yeah, it is a family thing. It's it was important to all of us to have that, and even the ethos of the label. It was mates making tunes together. It always felt like a family, and it's lovely, just catching up with Mark today, Remark today. Someone I've known for not quite 30 years, but a good part of that. And if I don't see him from like 1 year to the next, it don't matter. We get back together, and the banter's still the same. And these are lifelong friendships,
Yeah.
And it's nice, and after all this time, I can still pick up the phone to any of these lads, and honestly, I accept I've been out of the scene for a period because I went on to do other things with the compilation brands, the movies and stuff that I make, and those friendships are for life,
Yeah, no, it was great to hear. I want to dig a little bit further back in, specifically in the birth of Suburban Base. What's your kind of you're putting out a few of these white labels. You think you're getting onto something. talk to me about how your kind of mindset is and how you want to approach this, from kind of designing, thinking of the name for starters. How do you get the logo design? How are you kind of approaching this from where you were at that time?
Yeah. We bounced around a bunch of ideas and names and stuff, and we already had Boogie Times because of the shop, and that was named after an old sort of funk boogie record that I was quite a fan of, because that was everything I was into before this whole scene, and so that was that is what that was, literally just named after a song. Suburban Base, I thought I was very clever at the time, and I love a pun, and I'm like, oh, that shortens to sub bass, and sub bass, being a frequency in production.
Yeah.
But also, we're suburban based. We're in Romford, which was, I guess it's considered part of London now, but it was considered the suburbs of London, certainly at that time. And so I was like, we're literally suburban based because we're just outside of London, and we're metaphorically suburban based because we're outside of the mainstream music industry. And that's like, I thought it was this highbrow kind of like, we're suburban based. We're like, we're not doing the mainstream. We're doing our own thing. It's it's an indie label, and it's still an indie label. All the catalog. I've worked with every major label and the compilation brands and stuff that I own. I still have all the catalog from day one intact, and it's never been watered down like that. It's important to keep the integrity of it,
Yeah.
and that's where the sub bass thing comes from. Dave Nods, our in-house resident artist, just was doodling away, absolutely killed it. I remember when he drew that, when he joined that S and the B together. I mean, this was like shut us down, I think, on a Friday night in the shop, and we're bouncing around ideas. And when he drew that and he joined that S and the B together, I was blown away. I was like, that's just amazing. And that's what kind of made it stick. Oh, this is the name we're going for. We came up with Dave, I was chatting to the other day, Nods, and he was like, yeah, these were some of the names that we considered. I do not know how here he is. He's just up in the comments. Hello, Nods. How you doing, mate? Yeah, he mentioned, oh, we had this name and that name. I'm like, how's your memory so good? Because I can't remember anything from 91 through 95, and he was like throwing all these names we was banning. I'm like, did we? I thought it was always suburban bass, but it was after he nailed it in one hit with that SB. And anyone, I've seen a lot of bootleg merch and stuff over the years, and anyone that gets it slightly wrong, you can't redraw that logo. You can't get it slightly off. It just don't look right. Do you know what I mean? It's got to be spot on. It's a beautiful thing, and it's iconic now. You see that on anything, and it's like, if you're a raver of a certain age, you're like, do you know what I mean? Yeah.
I mean, look, this kind of goes back to me for, I was kind of buying records at that point, but as I say, I was working part-time in the greengrocers. I was still at school. So, you're only getting a Saturday's wage or whatever it was. So you're only really buying a couple of records a week. But you'd walk in there and there'd be like, excuse me, there'd be specific labels that you would just automatically be drawn to. And Suburban Base was 100% there. And it wasn't just about the kind of the iconic symbolism of the artwork. It was also that trusted A&R process. You just knew that whatever was on that record was going to be a good record to buy. And that kind of sort of leads me to ask you a little bit more about the musical approach to Suburban Base. Did was there a grand plan? Was it a handful of that you thought this will shape the label nicely? How did you approach the kind of musical side of Suburban Base?
It was a little bit whatever came through the door, and a little bit you know, what we as friends were enjoying, and we just started making our own stuff. So it wasn't like, you know, we didn't A&R anything. We weren't really signing anything outside of our group. There was stuff that Hype brought through, but then that was considered, you know, part of our group. And we really didn't solicit any demos. We never had any demos, never signed anything off demos. It was like, okay, we've got the studio, and we had an in-house engineer / producer, Austin, and then also Mikey James, and for a while, and we would just put people in, you know, jump in and do something, see what you come out with. The thing is, we were part of an era where we were part of the sound evolving. We were integral to the evolution of the sound. So there couldn't ever be any grand plan. You couldn't go, oh, I'm going to make jungle, because it didn't exist until we and others like us started making it. Do you know what I mean? It was like we went from, it was all called rave and everything goes. You'd hear all sorts of music at a rave, you know, and then it was hardcore and, you know, breakbeat hardcore, and, you know, oh look, there's Psy. Too Bad Mice. They had some great remixes too. Yeah.
Do you know what?
Not yours, Danny. Not yours, mate. we did. You know, the music was absolute quality. When we come to get remixes in, that was really important. Choosing who did those, because if you're going to be on Suburban Base, you know, I'm wanting you to bring your A game, and having those remixes, having people that I loved and really respected from other labels that we were friends with. It was really important that we had, you know, just the quality was maintained. But most of the in-house stuff was basically, it was all us. It was like, you know, let's jump in and do something. How's it sound? And when you're part of the evolution of the sound, listen to Suburban Base from like 91 releases, don't sound anything like 92 releases, changes again in 93 releases. Like, you can literally track the evolution and the progression of the sound through Suburban Base releases, because we were part of that evolution, you know, as, you know, breakbeat rave went happy hardcore this way, and it went jungle that way, and then that rolled into drum and bass and rolling drum and bass, and it's like, it's all, it can all be measured by looking at just a cross section of releases from that label, you know. So it wasn't a sit down. There's Dice as well, just popped up in the comments. Got to give a big shout out to him, because what great stuff. I mean, production house and the stuff they were doing over there, again, fabulous. And I think that was what's really important to, I love to call them fans or a fan base, but like at this point they've been with us for so long that they're friends, aren't they? You know, the friends, the followers of our social media, they've been with us forever. And I think the important thing is they could see and connect with us because we were friends, Jay. It was me and Nods and Danny Breaks and Winston and all that crew, and, you know, even Andy having, you know, a separate imprint with Ram was still part of the clique, you know what I mean? And then Zinc and Hype and those guys, and then Moving Shadow, Reinforce. There was no rivalry. We were all mates. We were. I wanted to see and support what the Moving Shadow boys were doing, and we would get, because we had the record shop, we'd get the latest Reinforced records in, and that would make us up our game. We're like, oh, they're doing this, and we'd get their latest one in. And I've spoke to, you know, Gus and Mark and all that since. They're like, yeah, they did the same. You know, they get the latest Suburban Base. What are they doing? You know, it was a friendly rivalry, but it was, we was all just like, all just mates within our crew, and no bitterness or rivalry between anyone else. We did a whole album with Moving Shadow because it was like, let's get in the studio and do something together. We hung out, we went to raves together. It was all pals, you know.
It was the joint EP, right?
The joint LP. My battery's about to go, so I'm going to search for a socket here.
No worries.
So professional.
I'm just going to give you a quick
LP.
as well. Sai is going to ask a question, and he loves his question. He is going to ask, who is your favourite member of Too Bad Mice? So just to give you a pre-warning, that question may be coming in soon.
He's going to ask it. Is that? I think that's asked, isn't it? I think he's done it.
Well, do you know what? Let's ask it. There you go. It's become a bit of a theme for this show that Sai wants to know from everyone who their favourite member of Too Bad Mice is.
Can I say Rob Playford? Can I say Rob Playford, or is he going to kill me? Simon, it's you, mate. It's you. I don't know. I love like Simon and Sean. We go so far back. We've got so much history. They're my favourite suburban bass artists that never were. You know, or I don't know. Maybe Andy is. I don't know, but. You know, we had so much good company around us. You know, it wasn't just about sub bass. It was about us all pushing the limits of, you know, where the sound was going and what it was doing. And they're lovely lads. We used to have so much jokes with them. And then like Blame and Justice were on our mailing lists and stuff. And back in those days, you always had like a reaction sheet you had to fill in and send it back to stay on the mailing list. And they used to just absolutely rip us to shreds, you know. When Blame's like sheet came back in, it would be like, you know, I can't even repeat some of the stuff, but they'd rip us to shreds. And it was hilarious, you know what I mean? It was just banter, you know, between the labels. And I don't know if that still exists, you know what I mean? I don't know if everyone got so cliquey and so sort of like, you know, take themselves a little bit too seriously. And you have to you have to respect the scene. You have to, you know, not make a mockery of it or yourselves. But, you know, there needs to be a degree of humor to it all. There needs to be, you know, goodwill and a pleasure in doing it, you know. And that's what it was for us. You know, we just enjoyed everything we were doing, you know.
You know, it's really nice to hear that, you know, especially when a scene is forming and starting, you know, from an event, rave perspective to music, the pirate radio, DJs, MCs, you know, everyone's involved in it. You know, it can only grow if you're joining, you know, together, or at the very least, you respect each other, you know, because everyone's, you know, building towards the same thing. So it's lovely to hear that, you know, you had that relationship in there. You've probably got a few, but I'd love to know, you know, was there a moment with Suburban Base where you went, wow, I didn't think this was going to happen, you know, we've really hit a milestone here, something that you were, you know, super proud of?
I don't know, when we sold out 100 MA2 jackets the other week, 30 years later, like, wow, really? We sold out 100 jackets in like within hours, like that. 30 years on, really?
Yeah.
Back then, Jay, it was all just happening around us. I was so busy, you didn't stop and think. There was no moment where I went, you know, I was just like, okay, keep moving forward, you know, keep doing it. And, you know, so we had a couple of tracks sort of tickle the charts a little bit. We're getting at the top of the dance charts. Then all of a sudden, boom, Sons goes top 40. And fantastic moment. But it was like, okay, that was meant to happen. We worked towards that, you know. It wasn't like, oh, wow, you know, that was you know, and it couldn't be any sort of flash in the pan. We worked towards that. And it felt good that was happening. But it was everything was just, I turned into a workaholic, you know. Yeah, I'm raving and partying with my friends and stuff like that. But when you're just working, you don't ever kind of stop and look back at it and go, oh, well, we've done something here. We've done all right here, you know. And it takes you maybe years later to realize that there was like, you know, you've almost become part of popular culture, or you've helped shape popular culture, youth culture. There's it, you know, that doesn't occur to you at the time. You're just going on, and you know, you know, yeah, you're just living and breathing the essence of it, you know.
Well, there are many people out there, myself included, that are glad that you did, for sure. Let's talk a little bit about the studio. So if I record this right, you had a studio just near to where the shop was, right? How did that sort of all get started and come about?
The studio, and I posted a photo of the studio. I took a little drive down memory lane since I've been back over here, and it was basically the back garden of my mum and dad's house in Collier Row. And if anyone knows Collier Row, not the most glamorous of areas, but they had a double garage, which was perfect to build a studio in. And so this big double fold-up door, we bricked it up from the inside, put a bunch of like rock wool and sound insulation into it, put a secondary glazed pane in front of the window that was there rather than brick that up. Oh, there you go. Yeah, so inside that door there was like that was basically a brick wall, but that was a dummy door at that point. Didn't open and close. And we built a little sound booth, breeze block sound booth, and carpeted it up, and didn't know what we was doing. Totally making up as we went along. And we filled it up with, you know, an Atari ST, Akai 950. I think we had an M1. You know, there was some nice analog gear at the time that we got really cheap because no one wanted all this crappy analog gear. So we had some like fantastic like Korgs and Moogs and stuff like that like, you know, were unloved at that point. We got them so cheap. I wish I had them now.
Yeah.
And we built this studio, and most of those early things were recorded there or mixed down there. And yeah, it was a garage in Collier Row, Romford. Not glamorous at all. But I mean, that got us all the way into the charts and around the world. So, you know.
But that's what I love about it. It's the self-made man, for want of a better phrase, that, you know, the DIY approach. You know, there was no glamorous big Universal or Sony studios. It was just literally someone with a passion who managed to find a few quid, get themselves an Atari ST, and they just kind of cracked on with it and found that outlet for creativity. You know, and I think you know, the scene certainly wouldn't have been anywhere near what it was had you had, you know, all these kind of music producers and what have you thrown in there. It was, you know, it needed that raw approach to it.
I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, I think the scene evolved because we didn't know what the hell we were doing. You know, with so many like techniques came out of that, you know, from, you know, time stretching and stuff like that. You know, it was doing things with the equipment that the equipment was not intended to do, and that comes out of, you know, and some of the mix downs. Me and Remark were talking about it today over lunch, and some of the mix downs we listen to now, they're awful compared to what the guys these days are doing, you know, and they've got every sound pack under the sun on their computer, you know, and we were trying to do stuff with, like, you know, 10-second sample time, and splitting channels just to try and, like, you know, get a little bit more out of it. And, you know, that the limitations of the equipment bred that creativity. We were pushing this equipment to its limits to do things it wasn't meant to do. And I think, you know, even the equipment manufacturers acknowledge that. I mean, dance music in general has really dictated the way, you know, this musical equipment is used and how the manufacturers now supply it, and you know, what its intended use is. We push the boundaries of the equipment, you know.
Yeah.
And that's how the sound evolved. You know, the sound wouldn't have evolved if we were all like trained music producers. It wouldn't have been rough and raw and ready. It wouldn't have been anything goes, throw the kitchen sink at it, see what sounds cool. We were going in there with some crazy ideas. I mean, I got, you know, there's the Cubase track that if you play the vinyl backwards, there's a hidden message in it. We're just doing things for fun. And we did that. And then I completely forgot to tell anyone. So it went for years and years. The whole through the, I was going to put it on the press release when we put that record out, Hardcore Will Never Die.
Yeah, yeah.
Ended up being a prophecy, you know. That became a phrase that kind of took on a life of its own, Hardcore Will Never Die. But on that tune, if you play it backwards, there's a hidden message in it. And we were just doing stuff like that for fun. And then completely forgot to telling it was in there until years later. You know, putting messages in the run out grooves, etching things in the run out grooves, you know, just doing things that kind of amused us, you know?
Yeah.
And not super professional, but like that's what helped shape the scene, that, you know, it could grow through that kind of ingenuity, you know?
Yeah. What was how much time did you get to spend in the studio? Because obviously at the time you got the shop and the studio. So how were you balancing between those two?
Me personally, I found it quite difficult in the end, because I went from being, I'm going to be a shopkeeper, I just want to be behind the counter of a dance music specialist shop, and started my own to do that, to then, you know, I'm running a record label, and I would jump in and make some tunes and stuff like that alongside everyone else, to the label taking off to the point where, like, wow, this is snowballing, and I don't have time to spend hardly any time in my shop, and I don't have time really to get in the studio so much. So there was only a few sort of I used the artist name Cubase and Boogie Times Tribe, along with JD Cruz. That was Boogie Times Tribe. And there was only a few of them. And then, you know, after a certain period, there wasn't any more, because I was just like, I ended up being the guy behind the desk. And at that point, I had no desire to be a DJ. I didn't want to be the guy driving up and down the country to gigs, and, you know, I left that to Hype and those guys. You know, I didn't want to be that guy. And I ended up being the guy behind the desk, and sort of like managing and running everything. And, you know, I had so many invites over the years to sort of join people on tours, and you know, DJs were sending out to Australia and Canada and whatever, and I didn't have time for it. I'm like, you know, sort of building what we were creating back then, you know. So yeah, I did sort of less and less sort of production work, and yeah, no regrets, because I've enjoyed every aspect of it. I find it just as creative, kind of like, you know, bringing things to market and finding an audience for them, and, you know, I enjoy every aspect of it, you know.
Well, you know, every scene or every sector, you know, needs those different skill sets, right? You know, if you hadn't done what you'd done, then Suburban Base would not be what it was or is now. So it needed that, you know, that business acumen, like you say, behind it, to make sure that ship was being steered into the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. I mean, I don't know where it came from. Maybe it came from my parents being self-employed people, having this grocery store in East London, that yeah, I feel like I had this kind of natural entrepreneurism. You know, I left school at 16, Jay, you know, and didn't even pick up my qualifications, you know, started life in a block of flats in Stratford. I shouldn't be where I am, you know what I mean? But so much of it was intuitive, you know, and you know, so some people in and around the scene sort of like, you know, joke me a little bit. So Remark did it today about, you know, being this successful businessman. You know, if anyone, you know, does a bit of business and does well, they're like, oh, you've done a Danny Donnelly or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Because I found a way of, like, you know, doing what we was doing in an underground scene in a professional way, and taking it just a little bit further, and taking it to a global stage. See, another thing, you know, people try and rewrite history, but another thing that maybe isn't widely acknowledged is that we were, I was, the label was part of globally exporting this sound as well. We were the first ever UK rave label to open up in the US. And then I signed Diesel Boy, and we worked with AK 1200 and the first sort of US sort of drum and bass talent. And we were the first UK rave label to have like offices on Hollywood and Vine and a distribution deal. The first ever UK rave label in South America. I did a deal in Brazil. We signed and discovered DJ Markey, who's a huge name in the scene. But his first 3 albums were Suburban Base albums in Brazil. And but no one knows that outside of Brazil, you know? He did 3 albums for Suburban Base before he ever came to the UK and did what he did since. And we were the first ever drum and bass jungle label in Japan. So, you know, we played our part in globally exporting this sound, getting it out there. You know, I had the first American deal, first South American deal. We, you know, so part of the kind of foundations that a lot of people's careers kind of sit on in that regard, you know.
And would you say, was that like a kind of conscious decision, or was it a little bit more kind of opportunities came up, or, you know, did you make those opportunities, or did they get kind of presented?
Well, I created those opportunities. I mean, we really did. There was some people in specific territories that had an interest in what we were doing, but, you know, so Florida, for instance, was a hotbed for I guess breakbeat rave, we would have called it at the time. It wasn't drum and bass in those early days. So like DJ Icy invited us to come and play a gig in Orlando, and he got in touch with like the Moving Shadow Boys and stuff like that as well. And then but I made the conscious decision to go back and put on parties and actually paid for events. So we were, you know, woefully out of pocket every time we go over there, but we made an effort to get over there and do it. You know, the first few releases we did over there, you know, were all at losses. You know, this must have been, I guess, 93. I took like Andy C and Sponge and Monty and, you know, a bunch of these guys out to Florida and put on a party. We didn't make any money, but we were helping get the sound out there, you know? So you had to take the initiative. You had to kind of, you know, you had to put your money where your mouth is if you're going to make the scene grow. What's that say? Something about love you. My son, Patrice, just leave him. Isn't that lovely?
Yeah.
When you could just get interrupted mid-interview. But, where's my ring? Sorry being so unprofessional, Jay.
Don't you worry, mate. It's all chilled out, mate. Yeah. We're all good. So look, this is really interesting. It's really interesting hearing you talk about that. You know, one of the things, again, for me that I always find interesting is these stories, because, you know, as a raver in 91, 92, 93, 94, you know, you're going to like, you know, mostly kind of London events. Then you might go to, you know, a big event, you know, wherever it may be throughout the UK. But you've got no insight as to what is going on abroad. You know, I had no idea that even DJs were leaving the country. Didn't even think about it, to be perfectly honest. You know, obviously with no internet, magazines not covering it, you know, it was very much, you know, it was pirate radio, it was clubs, it was record shops. You know, those were your 3 kind of sources of information. So it is really interesting to hear, you know, people like yourself that had kind of pushed it outside there. You know, I'd heard that, you know, Canada was another place that had kind of been quite early picking up on that sound as well. Did you ever get out to Canada at all?
Yeah, there was a big scene in Toronto. Toronto was the spot for sort of early D&B. And it was very much word of mouth. I mean, I'd go as far as to say like pirate radio was like the analog version of the internet. You know, pirate radio was getting it out there, and us having to sort of like export 12 inches was a whole process, where now a record can be like around the world in a second. Do you know what I mean? As soon as it's posted, it's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
But you know, if you wanted to get a message out about your music, if you wanted to get a message out about your event, it was pirate radio. It was flyering, you know, actually handing out leaflets in the freezing cold after a party. You know, this was like analog before the digital age. And if you found a record and tracked down a record, you know, it meant so much more, you know.
Yeah.
You come into the shop, you know when they come into the shop and it's like, I've heard this tune, mate, and it's like, you know, they'll hum you a little bit of it. They'll, and it's like they'll and then when you found it for them, you've tracked it down, you've ID'd their track. No Shazam, it's Winston Boogie Times telling you what it is. Do you know what I mean? And it's just golden moments, you know.
Yeah.
And the pirate radio guys did something that I can't thank them enough, because we would have been nothing without them. The scene would have been nothing without them, and they were taking a risk every single time they went on air. And I think they were the backbone of any of these scenes, really. And the risk takers, you know.
Yeah.
I'm sitting in a nice warm office putting out music. I can only, you know, take my hat off to what these guys were doing, you know.
Yeah.
And they were the internet, you know. That was what it was.
Yeah, no, it's you're right. You know, the Calls, Defected, Weekend Rush, Pulses, you know, Centre Force, you know, there were many, many, many to name that all contributed towards spreading that sound to where you would never get it. You know, I for one fully appreciate it far more now than I did back then. You know, I wasn't old enough to go into raves really sort of 90, 91. So the only lifeline once kind of discovering it was pirate radio. Your crappy little stereo in your room, you're dangling cables, throwing it out your bedroom window, trying to get the best reception you can to pick it up. Your mates recording tapes, swapping tapes, Frankie Bones and all those guys. You know, it was an amazing way of getting involved in that scene. And again, I think part of that was the excitement of it. You know, you couldn't walk at that point into Woolworths and buy, you know, the majority of the records that you were listening to. You were connected to something that was fresh, that was raw, that was just starting, and even just listening, just being a listener and a music fan and a raver, I was just, you know, you feel so privileged to be a part of that start of the journey.
You know what it was, Jay? We all had ownership of the scene, you know, like from the guys that were running record labels or doing things in it, just to the kid that was going out raving. They felt ownership of that scene. This is theirs. This is special to them. You know, they might even just have a handful of records. They might have none at all. They might just, you know, save up for that ticket to go to the event. But it was theirs. You know, it was their thing. This is my thing. Me and a couple of mates. And other people ain't into this and they don't get it, and it was theirs. And it was about having the ownership of it, you know. And I think that's why people still feel so passionately about it now. And we're seeing, you know, grown people, you know, wanting to wear, you know, a logo of their favorite label on their chest. There you go.
With pride.
You know, it's something that we can identify with and connect with, and it's more than just a nostalgic thing. It's more than just like, oh, wasn't it good back then?
Yeah,
it's like, you know, it's about that ownership, and it's about, we were really part of something that was really very special, that is the foundation for everything else. I mean, you know, UK urban music, so much of it stands on this. You know, when you look at what speed garage and the UK garage scene became, evolving into grime music and then dubstep, and where UK rap is now, you know, would all of them have to sort of tip their hat to this urban UK sound that evolved out of the rave scene. All of those genres need to kind of, you know, give a little bit of respect to what came before. And this was definitely the foundations of what came before, Jay, you know?
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. You know, music, I've always seen it as a very cyclical thing, you know, whether it be taking influences or samples or whatever it may be. And, you know, it always comes around. And, you know, specifically that sort of kind of 91 to 93, 4, 5, 6 kind of era, you know, I think, you know, it may not be anywhere near as strong, and I mean strong as in the amount of people that are into it. But man, there is still a scene there. You know, you've seen there's a lot of labels that are doing represses. You know, Bill Vega, you know, fair play to him. You know, he's got Lifting Spirits off the ground and doing some great represses. You know,
I was and Miles the other day. He was on the phone the other day, and it's just lovely reconnecting with all these people. You know, I've not spoken to Ant in a long time, but you know, it's like I was chatting to him in the shop, you know, the day before. You know.
Yeah.
And those sort of like relationships that have been made are just so important, and everyone has them. Even if you weren't working in the industry, everyone has those kind of relationships, you know, from people they raved with, and you know, people have met lifelong friends within the scene, and it's just, you know, it was an important time in our lives and still is. I don't like to just sort of dwell on, you know, I don't think of us as an old school label even, and we're going to be putting some new stuff out for Subbase 30 years, and it was never about that for me, because we were always progressing, always evolving, and the sound, we were part of the evolution of the sound. And yeah, we've been away for a minute, but I wouldn't want to be stuck in the past. I haven't. Personally, my career went on, and I ended up creating like the Pure albums, and my company did Euphoria and all the other stuff that we went on to do. So I haven't stood still and stood in the past, and I don't think necessarily that's what the fans, the friends of Suburban Base, the people that are into what is considered old school, I don't think it's just about being, you know, reminiscing on, you know, weren't it better when I was younger? It's about it being culturally such a flashpoint, you know. It changed so much, and in popular culture, you know, it's still resonating now. You're hearing production techniques, Jay, in computer games and in movie scores that, you know, these production techniques came exactly from what we were doing in those early days, you know, in that D&B scene, that sort of proto early jungle scene, you know, messing up that equipment, doing things it wasn't meant to do. And you're hearing these production techniques now still in mainstream, you know, and I think that's why it's still important to so many of us. It's important to me, not from an old school point of view, but from a today point of view. It's still important.
Yeah.
Do you know what I
mean? Yeah. So, Danny, I do want to pick up on a little something, because obviously we are looking at 30 years of Suburban Base next year. Are you able to kind of divulge on what you're thinking of doing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people that I don't really like to talk about stuff until it's, you know, out there and happening. But I think the year that we've just had, 2020, has been tough for a lot of people. What it did for me, and it's been a tough year. I've lost people that I love, and I think the blessing of this year is that it's given me a little bit of a pause, that I've been able to reconnect with the Suburban Base loyal friends on social media, because I always said I wouldn't come back to it and do it kind of half-heartedly. I don't think that's respectful of the legacy of the label.
Sure.
And I'd have to do it if it was meaningful, if I was 100% behind it. And as you know, I've done a lot of other things in my career that I'm sure a lot of people don't even connect the dots with all the things that I've done with, you know, creating the Pure Garage series and all the album brands and stuff that I've done since. But 2020 has given me that opportunity to kind of reconnect with the social media, and I've just been absolutely overwhelmed with the response, you know. So part of that, we've made a post just recently and they're sitting alongside me actually. There's a couple of crates of DAT tapes that need some sorting out. So if anyone wants to give me a hand, I've got a whole bunch of DAT tapes to go through, and there's a bunch of unreleased stuff. Jay, come over, mate. You get involved.
I'll bring my own DAT. I've got a DAT machine up there that's collecting dust.
I still got one. I just hope it still works all right and don't chew them up, because there's stuff there. We've got unreleased stuff, and I know people are excited to see that because the response we got to this post was insane. And I want to, I don't just want to be dropping, you know, merch on people and stuff like that unless we're you know, running as an operating label, and if we're doing it, it's gonna have the same high quality that it always had. But we've got these unreleased tracks. We've got like VIPs and remixes, and even some stuff from, like, you know, album projects that were started and not completed. There's multiple tracks here that haven't been released. Now people are going to go crazy for these. Slight delay in that every pressing plant in the world right now for vinyl is just working on like a ridiculous backlog, but we'll get to it. There you go, look, a bunch of DATs, and it's and we're going to get to them. We're going to start getting through them. Like I say, I've never rested on my laurels, lived in the past, so for me it's important to be putting out some current stuff as well, and there's a lot of the new breed of drum and bass guys, you know, I've been chatting with, and there's you know, there's obviously some love there for sub bass, and so we're going to get, I don't want to name names actually, but some of the biggest players in the world, honestly, in the world of drum and bass, are ready to come on board. So we'll be back exactly where we're supposed to be, you know. And already we're seeing yeah, absolutely. I mean, the engagement we've had just on some of the merch drops, but you can see as well, Jay, even doing the merch, we weren't just like, well, let's just slap a Suburban Base logo on something and knock a few out. No, there's some love and care and attention to them, you know. We keep them in short numbers so that they're exclusive, you know. We'll only do like 30 of a color, you know, or you know, 50 of an entire run, so you know you're one of only 50 people that have got that in the world. It's super exclusive. It's really, you know, it's special to you in the same way it was special to you first time around. And I think we owe that to the people that are still engaging with us on this level, you know. Just whacking a logo on and going, there you go, there's, you know, couple of hundred of them, take it or leave it, you know. That's not what it's about. It's about, you know, care and attention, good quality product. And a lot of people have got their jackets and their record bags from first time around, you know, from 30 years ago, because we put out quality products, you know what I mean? And there's like, I'm going to give you a sneak preview. I'm going to give you a sneak preview. This time, we ran out of record bags because we did a couple of drops. We did two styles of Suburban Base record bag, and we only did 50 pieces of each. Again, I want to make them collectible and exclusive, so we're going to bring back a record bag next week. Hopefully they're going to ship in time for Christmas. But when you look at the quality, the Boogie Times record bag, the quality of the stitch and stuff like that, I don't want to turn into an advert, but that's what's important to me. I don't want to tell you a bit of crap. And like the people that have bought the MAs, you know, it took us so long to find an MA jacket that wasn't just like some crappy knockoff off the market. It had to be decent. It had to be something that I want to wear. It had to be something that stands up to what we put out back then, you know. And that's what and it took us months of, you know, getting samples in and stuff like that. But people appreciated it. People were up in the messages going like, you know, and even the price ticket they were, I'd rather do that than sell any old crap, you know.
Yeah.
We're up in the comments going, you know, love it, fits like a glove, quality's brilliant, you know, and that's what it's about. And when we bring back the music, not going to be half-hearted. I wouldn't touch the brand if I was going to do it half-hearted. You know, the legacy of it should be either left alone or done, you know, with my full attention and a proper sort of, you know, love and care and consideration to it, you know.
Yeah, nice. Well, it sounds like you've got some super exciting stuff planned for next year, and I know there's going to be many people excited about that. But there was, you know, a huge part of your life from Suburban Base to now, and it was the whole Pure series. To talk us a little bit about, you know, how the Pure stuff started.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I think a lot of people that would know me from Suburban Base wouldn't even put two and two together, that, you know, it's the same bloke that that did Suburban Base that put together the Pure album brand. So yeah, I devised that. So all the Pure albums you see, the TV advertised sort of compilation album brand, Pure Garage, Pure Deep House, Pure R&B back in the day, Pure Deep House we just got another sales award for. At this point I've got 58, I believe, 58 platinum and gold disc awards for that.
That's
my company also created the Euphoria album brand, which is a big sort of trance album brand, and we did the Euphoria nights in Ibiza it was the biggest Saturday night in Ibiza for like 8 years straight. And then I went on to make movies, and I've just shot a documentary film, and you know, I've had a very interesting career, you know. But you know, the Pure brand is, you know, arguably a different lane completely, but arguably kind of more successful even than Suburban Base. But the Suburban Base has that fondness because it was the origin story, you know. It was like, and it built the foundations for not just what I wanted to do next in my career, but, you know, look at the people that came out of there, you know, all the other artists that kind of launchpad from there. Look at all the genres that launchpad that built on the foundations of, you know, jungle, drum and bass, all those genres that came after. You know, it's and it's funny sometimes when you chat to someone that kind of knows a little bit of their music history and kind of goes, "Oh crap, you did the Pure Garage albums and Suburban Base," and I never knew, you know.
Yeah, I certainly didn't know. I'm pretty sure I've got about 5 of the EZ ones. They were always ones to get.
Everyone's got at least one of the Pure albums in their collection somewhere. It's become, I mean, it's kind of, it's the biggest. I sound like a dick even repeating this, but it's the biggest selling urban dance music compilation brand in the UK ever. You know, if you consider Pure a brand across all of those titles.
Well, if you also consider, you know, someone like Ministry of Sound, you know, which the amount of compilations they chucked out, there's definitely some stiff competition there, right?
Yeah. I mean, but in the urban field and arguably, you know, Ministry is I mean, it's a brand, but it's a label. And Pure, I consider, like, you know, the brand name. Yeah, I mean, you know, we didn't create garage, but we helped it find a wider audience with those Pure Garage albums. So that was really important to that. And again, you know, it's all part of sort of foundation building for artists. It's about getting you know, a wider audience for what we all do. You know, there is There is no selling out. There's just selling more records. If we make this music, I want people to enjoy it. You know, the real reward is when people tell you that the entertainment that you've offered throughout your career has helped them through bad times, maybe, you know, or it's inspired them to do something, maybe, you know. That's important. That's what's really important to me, you know.
Yeah, 100%. Mate, you've had such, I mean, we haven't even talked about the films as well yet. So you've got how did you get involved in that side of things?
It got to the point where there was a shift in the music industry. I've always been one to sort of spot trends early and kind of, you know, business opportunities. And as the compilation business almost sort of just fell off a cliff with file sharing, peer-to-peer file sharing, and compilations weren't really a thing anymore. People were just downloading tracks and whatever. I'm sitting on the music catalog. I've spent my entire career in the music industry. I'm like, well, an area where you can still capitalize on some of this catalog is in synchronization, which is syncing music to film and TV and commercials, and we've been quite successful in that. You may have noticed Sons of a Loop de Loop in a big car campaign. So syncing stuff. So my idea was that, okay, I'd invest in a couple of independent films, and I would manage the music rights from the compilation, soundtrack album, to music supervising the film. And I did that. But very quickly, I'm kind of like observing what's going on with this indie film production. I'm like, you know, running an independent film company isn't that different than running an independent record label. It's transferable skills. I'm an entrepreneur. Why am I investing in someone else's project when I can invest in my own? So I formed, you know, Pure Movies, and then you know, made a couple of feature films. My first film that I produced and funded, Victim, was actually the movie that discovered Letitia Wright, who went on to be Shuri in Black Panther, huge Hollywood box office star. And her first movie was Victim that I put together. That's the first production that I've done. And just a very genuine story. Couple of great writers from South London, Chin and Buck. Buck actually works with gigs, so it's all, you know, it's all music world kind of related. And my mate Mazza, another local Romford boy, as a producer. Great film, great thing to kind of cut your teeth on, and then to have the kind of accolade that, you know, that discovered Letitia, and she's in Black Panther and you know, all the Marvel Avengers movies and stuff like that. Wonderful, you know. I've done some interesting things in my time, you know.
Well,
and I've just spent 2 years working on a documentary actually about bass music, and we're hoping that's gonna debut at South by Southwest. But I mean, the film festival circuit right now is just a little bit of a mess, because it's like, you know, digital and all that kind of stuff. But I spent 2 years sort of directing and putting together that movie, which is a fantastic movie. It goes from origins of what, you know, what we were doing, to the kind of the EDM boom, and Skrillex is one of the leads in the film, and it takes you through that journey, and, you know, the dubstep kind of scene, kind of taking things from sort of the UK to the US as the precursor to that explosion, you know. So interesting film. What I didn't want to do, Jay, was make a film that was like, you know, this is the history of drum and bass, this is the history of jungle, because that, you never satisfy everybody. You know, you'll always have people, well, why didn't you talk to this person, and why did you talk to him? And that's, your opinion of how it evolved is different to how someone else sees it. And, you know, so I didn't want to do the history of drum and bass, which, you know, if anyone's going to do it, I think I'm well placed to do it. But as someone from that scene and is now a filmmaker.
Mm.
But I did this more as a thesis, and it's a lot of the points that we've been talking about in this chat we've been having here. You know, it's a thesis that bass music, for want of a better kind of more collective term, has had a huge impact on popular culture, because you are hearing it in computer games and that production style in movie scores and in TV idents and commercials, and you know that whether you know it or not, you know, Chase and Status are producing for Rihanna, and you know Flux Pavilion, the track is with Kanye and Jay-Z and stuff like that. It's had this huge cultural impact, and so I did a bass music film kind of as a thesis. But there's a lot of characters in it that, you know, the heads are going to love as well. You know, Goldie's in it, for Ronnie Size is in it, Andy's in it, you know, and then all the new guys, you know, your Excision, Flux Pavilion, Skrillex, and all those guys from over there, you know. So
it's quite an amazing journey. All I can just think now is pure space travel is probably like the next business thing on the cards, right?
I did register Pure Airlines at one point. Nice. And we did a couple of flights from LA to Vegas, sort of like private chartered flights and stuff like that. I'm nothing if not ambitious, Jay.
Yeah. Well, listen, mate. Honestly, clearly from your track record, from working in a record store to owning having one of the most influential labels that's out there, and moving on to compilations and movies, you know, it has been a pretty phenomenal journey, mate. And I'm sure it is not yet over by any means.
There's still more to do, mate. There's still more to do.
Yeah.
So as long as I'm living and breathing, as long as I still enjoy it, you know, I mean, that's what I said about Suburban Base, sort of, you know, first time round. And that's why I put a pause on it, because it got to the point it wasn't the same. It wasn't fun. You know, everyone taking themselves too seriously at a certain point when we stopped releasing. And everyone thought it was the weirdest decision, mate, that like, because we were still a big label doing, you know, good quantity of sales and stuff. And it was like, it was almost, it was hard to kind of stop that truck rolling down the street, you know, because we were just, it was a juggernaut going, you know, and to wind that back in, you know, I was losing money for a couple of years by stopping. But sometimes you have to take, you know, you got to take a step back to take two steps forward. And there was other things I wanted to do, and it was time to sort of clean break it. And what I didn't want to do was run Suburban Base half-heartedly and let it kind of fizzle away. And it's never had that. And I think that's why it's still got this kind of like, I mean, dare I call it legendary status, because there wasn't like a bad patch. It wasn't like a, do you know what I mean? It didn't go through a like, oh, it's being run into the ground. It's just kind of like, can I stop that? Because, you know, as the you know, the chairman of the company, the founder of the company, there was other things I wanted to go and do that were taking my attention away. I didn't want to run it half-heartedly and do a disservice to the legacy of the label, you know?
Yeah.
And it's only now that I'm kind of looking at, you know, come back and give it some
and I'm
focus.
Sure making that decision has enabled you to step back into it, you know, pause on a high and then come back in. Listen, Danny, before we wrap up, I do want to find out a little bit more about this Bass Impact podcast that you've started. The first episode's out, and it's out everywhere, Spotify, Apple Music, what have you. Marv Kane, I love Marv. He's such an amazing character. I really do. And it was really great to hear you chat to him about the old days and the dub plate culture. Again, you know, what's the kind of sort of thinking and inspiration behind kicking this off?
Well, with the podcast, obviously, I want to lead up towards and build some awareness before the movie. So it's been very enjoyable for me engaging with, let's call it, the fan base on social media. and it's another avenue to do that. I've been living and working in California for the last 6 years or so, and I signed with the world's, I think it's the world's only podcast network that specializes in music podcasts. So we're on there with them. So it will be out everywhere. It's available on every platform: Deezer, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, iTunes, everything. So, and the first few episodes are certainly going to be Suburban Base focus, where I catch up with people. I think you can hear in that Marv Kane one, it's just banter. It's just like, it's just me and Marv. He's full of energy. He's a lovely bloke, and we just sort of pick up where we left off. However last time we saw each other. I say I was having lunch with Remark today. We just pick up where we left off. And these are all great relationships, and you can hear that genuine relationships. That vibe come out in the podcast, and I want to do more of them. I want to, I want people to see that I'm enjoying it as much as I ever was. That it's genuine. There's a love and a passion there for it, and I like just putting out a bit of entertainment. Like I say, I've said a couple of times in this interview. Is it an interview? Chat. I've said a couple of times the real reward is people enjoying the entertainment you did, and this whole 2020 COVID lockdown situation, people being told that the entertainment industry isn't viable. Who would have survived 2020 without music, film, without that kind of entertainment? We are not just viable, we're essential. People have written to me, been on the brink of suicide, and our entertainment has got them through a tough time. Listening to what we do. My story, perhaps, if it's inspired someone, if a kid from a block of flats in Stratford can then wind up living and working in Hollywood making movies, then so can you. If it's inspired someone, then there's value in that. So anyone that says that entertainment isn't essential, what we do in music isn't essential, I mean, they're so far off the mark, mate. No one would have survived this year without a little bit of that,
and that extends to opera, theatre, just the whole the entertainment industry as a whole,
Let's the arts in every possible way. I mean, from graphic artists, big up nods, to music, to TV, film, every part of it. Entertainment is so important. It's the soul and the lifeblood of a community, and our country, and I've been living in America, obviously. They need to get back to the idea of being a community, and that's what we had in, if we want to call it the scene. That's what we had, a sense of community, and America needs to find that again. England needs to find that again. And I think music and entertainment really helps heal and helps people through those tough times. You're essential work.
You are not wrong, mate. Listen, I just wanted to thank you hugely for your time today, mate. I know you're a busy man, so I do really, really appreciate the time you've given us today to fill us in on some great stories, some great memories. It's been wonderful hearing your journey of where you've got up to right now. And I've got to say, I am super excited for 2021. I'm sure many other people for many reasons, but more so for 30 years of Suburban Base, mate. I myself will be fully supporting in any way I can, mate, and we're really looking forward to it. And we'll have to get a little. Do you know what? We need a little DAT party. That's what we need. Everyone turn up with a DAT player, a pair of headphones, and whip through them all.
I need some help, mate. If you got a bit of time on your hands, get round here. Let's schedule some releases,
mate. I might just take you off on that.
Well, you know what? Everyone needs a bit of work, apparently. 2020 and everyone on lockdown. I've got plenty of work. Maybe I should post a little job application at the end of this, because I need to crack on. We're going to be getting some stuff done. Yeah, we're going to be
what
very, very busy in the new year. Trust me.
There's a title. I'm a dub plate intern analysis and
Yeah,
analyst.
exactly. Yeah, you'll be a label manager before you know it.
Nice,
Mate,
mate.
It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Really, really enjoy it, and I hope you'll be a guest on my podcast in the future. I'd love to have a chat with you, and I want to hear your favorite songs and play us a few bangers that we can discuss, and I'll get you on the Bass Impact podcast. Yeah,
mate, it'd be my absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, mate. All right, well, Danny, take care of yourself, mate, and thank you everyone for it's been locked on. Do appreciate it. For those of you who missed it, it will be up on Spotify, Apple Music, Mixcloud, you name it. We're going to stick it everywhere. So till the next time, big up yourselves. Nice one, Danny.
Lovely. Thank you, mate. Bye.